Another year, another flagship LG OLED. Last year's G5 was LG's first OLED to use their new RGB tandem panel. The tech was very impressive, but the TV had some quirks that steered people away from it, especially when it initially launched. This year's G6 uses version 2.0 of the tandem panel. Does it fix those issues, or is LG repeating the same mistakes? Hi, I'm Ben from Ratings.com, and today we're reviewing the LG G6 OLED, which is LG's highest-end TV in 2026. The TV does have some improvements over last year's G5, most notably its new type of glossy screen coating. Unfortunately, like when last year's G-series model launched, it's full of quirks that make it a bit hard to recommend in its current state. We're just getting started with our 2026 TV reviews, and we'll be releasing videos that cover everything from more flagship models to budget models, so subscribe to the channel if you want to stay up to date. The G6 is currently available in sizes ranging from 55 inches to 83 inches. LG also showed off a 48-inch model at CES in January, but that size isn't available to purchase or pre-order at the time we film this video. The TV sits above the B6, C6, and C6H in LG's OLED lineup. There are certain things we won't cover in this video that are true of all OLEDs, like perfect black levels, wide viewing angles, and nearly instantaneous response times. Instead of retreading things that we already know, let's go deeper into what really separates this TV from the pack to see if it's worth the extra money over those more budget-friendly options. When other reviewers like Vincent from HDTV Test started testing their review samples about a month ago, the TV overtracked the EOTF in filmmaker mode, which makes the image look brighter than intended. We confirmed this when we received the G6 we purchased. After we updated the firmware to 43.02.66, which was the most current one at the time, the TV was still overtracking. We started testing the TV and got pretty far in the process when LG released another new firmware update, 43.02.67. This update was clearly meant to fix the overtracking issues, and it did, but LG went a bit too far. Shadows and midtones are now hugging that curve pretty tightly, but highlights and content mastered at either 1000 or 4000 nits are under-tracking quite a bit. That under-tracking in the highlights doesn't only affect accuracy, but it also impacts the TV's peak brightness in HDR with real content. With test slides, the G6 performs quite well. It peaks at over 2600 nits in filmmaker mode with a 2% window, which is 200 nits brighter than the G5 is. It's also over 200 nits brighter with a 25% window, peaking at 1300 nits, and 100 nits brighter with a 100% window, where it peaks at 499 nits. Come on LG, you were just 1 nit shy of 500. Unfortunately, that extra brightness doesn't translate to real content since the TV undertracks highlights. If you take a look at our real scene measurements, the TV doesn't reach the same level of brightness as the G5. Even the C6 is brighter with 2 out of our 3 real scenes. This is obviously disappointing since the G6 should be LG's brightest OLED. With that said, this is likely unintended, and there's a strong possibility that LG fixes the undertracking with a firmware update. If you like using filmmaker mode but wish it were brighter overall, you can always enable dynamic tone mapping. This extra brightness comes at the cost of accuracy, but enabling the feature gives you a brighter and punchier image overall, which is especially useful for bright rooms. Speaking of bright rooms, how does this TV perform in one? The TV's SDR brightness is outstanding. It reaches over 1000 nits with our real scene SDR test, which makes it the brightest OLED in SDR we've ever tested by a pretty large margin. On top of that, the TV has excellent handling of reflections, although its new screen coating is still glossy like it is on previous G-series models. This new coating is a bit duller than it is on other LG OLEDs. LG truly cooked up a glossy coating that is starting to approach the advantages you get from matte. Light sources directly facing the screen are dimmed considerably, which prevents the TV from looking like a mirror. When you combine that with the TV's impressive brightness, reflections essentially disappear when you're watching brighter content. It doesn't eliminate them entirely, so you can still see reflections on the screen in dark scenes. However, if you don't have any light sources facing the screen and just have some overhead lights on, you won't have to worry about pesky reflections most of the time. On top of its ability to handle glare, the TV barely loses any image quality in a bright room. Blacks remain super deep and colors still look vibrant, so you don't have to worry about trading in image quality if you want to flip your lights on. The TV's tandem panel provides excellent color volume in both SDR and HDR, leading to bright and punchy colors that are sure to impress anyone. Super bright colors are a bit washed out compared to QD OLED since the TV still has a white subpixel that's used to boost brightness, but colors are rich and well saturated in most content. Although the TV's coverage of DCI-P3 at 1000 nits still sits over 90% in HDR, it's not quite as good as last year's G5, which covered 97.5% of that commonly used color space at 1000 nits. It's not a big difference, but it's worth noting for those who want the best coverage possible. Unfortunately, the TV isn't as accurate out of the box as you'd expect from a flagship OLED. Gamma is a bit off, resulting in certain parts of the scene looking too dark while others are too bright. Overall color accuracy is solid, but lighter colors are a bit off, which might bother enthusiasts. If you have access to calibration tools or pay someone to calibrate the TV, SDR can look nearly perfect. Sadly, that's not the case for HDR. Although HDR looks pretty accurate out of the box, it's not perfect by any means, and many colors are undersaturated. The bigger issue is that calibrating the TV in HDR is nearly impossible using its built-in hardware. The TV's color management system doesn't work properly, since any adjustments we made had little to no effect. The only thing we could do to help improve color accuracy was set the color space to native and drop the color down to 49. This is unusual and is a disappointment to anyone who plans to get the TV calibrated. New to LG OLEDs this year is a 13-bit processing pipeline, which is meant to improve gradient handling, since that has always been a bit of a downside when comparing WOLEDs to QD OLEDs. We're happy to report that LG was successful here. The TV's gradient handling is nothing short of amazing. There's a tiny bit of banding in brighter greens, but even that is hard to notice. Scenes with complex gradients are incredibly smooth on the G6, making it on par with or even a bit better than QD OLEDs. Pretty cool, right? Well, unfortunately, Dolby Vision is a different story. We're gonna put this bluntly. Dolby Vision is kind of a mess on the G6. We love to use scenes from David Lowery's The Green Knight as a stress test of sorts, since it has many scenes that challenge even the best TVs. There's a stark difference between HDR10 and Dolby Vision with many moments in the film. As you can see for yourself, there's more visible banding in these clips, and there's strange contouring that occurs in certain scenes. A common complaint about last year's C and G series models was the diagonal lines that appeared in dim scenes. These lines were a side effect of the TV's dithering algorithm, but were only noticeable if you were sitting super close to the screen. We're happy to say that those lines are gone in HDR10. Unfortunately, that isn't the case for Dolby Vision. There are still diagonal lines that show up in certain dim scenes, but these ones are more spaced apart, which makes them more visible from a normal viewing distance than the lines on last year's models. These lines are a rare occurrence, but when they do show up, they're quite distracting. It's very odd that these lines appear in Dolby Vision, but not HDR10, and hopefully this can be fixed with a future firmware update. If you have a dedicated streaming device like the Apple TV, you can disable Dolby Vision and get the best image quality from HDR10. The problem here is that you can't disable Dolby Vision on the TV, so if you're using the internal apps, you're stuck watching a lot of content in Dolby Vision since the format is supported on many streaming services. You won't struggle to find a ton of modern gaming features here. The G6 has 4 HDMI 2.1 ports, reaches up to 165 Hz, and supports all commonly used VRR formats. Response times are almost instant, so motion is crisp and clear, and input lag is low, so gaming feels snappy. You also don't lose any brightness when using the Game Optimizer picture mode, so you can enjoy the best possible image quality and performance simultaneously. However, there is a strange issue when using HDIG with the PS5. The console's HDR calibration tool doesn't work as it normally does, since the calibration pattern only disappears entirely when you have the sliders maxed out. We messed around with this for a while and found a workaround. If you move the brightness up 22 clicks on the calibration screen, the pattern stops changing. 22 clicks equal around 2700 nits, which matches the peak brightness of the TV in the Game Optimizer picture mode. If you use this method to calibrate HDR on the PS5, HDIG works as it should. Strangely enough, we had no issues setting up HDIG on the Series X and on PC, but people have also reported similar issues on PC, so your mileage may vary. The G5 is still available in stock at most retailers and can be found much cheaper than the newer G6. One of the main advantages the G6 has is its improved reflection handling and HDR brightness, making it the better bright room performer. The G6 also has some of the best gradient handling we've ever seen, in HDR10 anyways. Outside of that, it's hard to recommend the G6 when you can get such a similar experience from the G5 for less money, especially since the G5 also performs quite well in bright rooms. So, are we feeling so fly like a G6? Sorry, we had to do it. Well, if you put aside some of the issues the TV has, it's one of the best OLEDs on the market. Sadly, there are things about this TV that you just can't ignore. It took numerous firmware updates to get the G5 to the state it's in today, so we're hopeful that it's going to be the same case here. However, we don't know for sure, and at this current moment in time, we'd only recommend the G6 to people who can live with its flaws. That's it for our review of the LG G6 OLED, but we have a good feeling that we're not quite done testing this TV. What do you think? We'd love to hear from you.